When we talk about the Keystone XL pipeline, most people think of Alberta's oil sands. But if you look at the route, it dekes over to Saskatchewan and North Dakota to pick up oil from the Bakken geological formation, which is of great interest to our guest. Now, Premier Brad Wall of Saskatchewan joins us from Washington, D.C. Hey, Premier, welcome back to the show.
Ezra, thanks for having me on.
Now, tell me what you're doing in Washington, D.C. Is it about this Keystone Pipeline?
It is principally about Keystone. It's about energy. We have a story to tell around clean coal, around uranium. We're going to be talking about trade issues in terms of agriculture. There's something called country of origin labeling. We think it's a non-tariff trade barrier to our agricultural products, to livestock, to the meat industry in our part of the world. So we're going to raise that. But Keystone is at the top of the list, and you know, you're right. We have an interest in it in terms of the route of the pipeline, of the fact that 15% of the oil in the pipeline at any given time could be Bakken oil, light, sweet crude. We have huge pipeline capacity issues in the Bakken formation, which we share grudgingly with Montana and North Dakota. And so it's important that from that perspective. It also is important, Ezra, from this perspective. Saskatchewan gets pinched by the differential as well. So we're currently selling our oil to our American friends at about a 19% discount. That means the owner of the resource, the people of the province of Saskatchewan, are losing about $300 million a year in revenue, and the industry in Saskatchewan about $2.5 billion. So it's a deal, and we're here. We're here in the interest of that and some of the other issues I've mentioned.
Now, last Friday, the State Department issued an environmental report, 2,000 pages long, very comprehensive, very scientific, not just political pundits. This was on top of 10,000 pages of environmental review, and basically they said there is no environmental impact. It's no surprise to those of us who know there are tens of thousands of miles of oil and gas pipelines crisscrossing America right now. But this was the Obama State Department saying, yeah, green light environmentally. What has that done? Has that put a new wind in your sails to make the case that this is not just great economically, but this is great environmentally?
I think we should be cautiously optimistic. I'll meet tomorrow with Carrie Lynn Jones, the Assistant Secretary of State, who was in the media, who was presenting the report, who is notionally the author of that report. And it is good news. It ought not to surprise us, because the State Department gave this thing a green light the first time around when the route was controversial in terms of Nebraska. Well, it's been rerouted, as you know, around an aquifer. We now have the Republican governor of Nebraska on side. The senators, the congressional delegation is principally on side. And so now the State Department has weighed in again, saying, really no change. There's not a big environmental impact here. It's not going to result in massive increase in production in the oil sands or any noticeable increase. And so I don't know what excuses remain. The economic argument has been made in terms of jobs in this country. We have trade unions on support, left and right supporting the economic argument. There's the energy independence argument, energy security in North America argument that's compelling. And now we have the State Department's report. So now, I hope that Canadians aren't complacent because I just think we need to be in this marketplace. We need to be here in the city making the case for a North American approach to energy, and that's part of the reason why we're down here.
Well, you're right. I mean, the other side, the anti-oil sands side, they're certainly not rolling over. I mean, you had a Twitter battle with someone who, well, he's not the president of the United States, but he played the president of the United States in a TV show, Martin Sheen. Tammy Robert asked Martin Sheen if he had a message for you, and he said, leave Obama alone. Now, what was your response to Martin Sheen, who told you to stay out of Washington? So you were tangling with a pretend president. You're a real premier. What did you say to Martin Sheen?
I didn't mind President Bartlett, actually.
Yeah.
I watched West Wing quite a bit, but I'm glad he's not the president today, because he'd make the wrong decision on Keystone. I just said that it didn't work for Mr. Sheen, that I work for the people of the province of Saskatchewan, and it's in our clear and present interest to see this pipeline move forward in the interest of the overall trade relationship, but as I've mentioned, in the interest of the treasury of the province and our economy. And so, I guess I thank him for his advice, and we had a bit of a Twitter exchange via Miss Robert.
I think you got the better of him. What's so frustrating to me is that Hollywood folks who have an enormous carbon footprint themselves are blind to some of the moral issues involving oil. I mean, just yesterday, Hugo Chavez passed away, and his Venezuelan oil not only has a higher carbon footprint than Canadian oil, but it was conflict oil. I mean, he was a bit of a bully, shutting down labor unions, shutting down opposition media outlets, threatening his neighbors in Colombia. So it's not just the economic and environment arguments that you're making. What about the ethical arguments? What about freedom of speech that Hollywood is based on? Let me throw one last question to you, Premier. You mentioned that you're in Washington also to talk about a non-tariff trade barrier, country of origin labeling on some Canadian products. I think if we had country of origin labeling on Canadian oil in American gas pumps, that would be a huge win for us, because if you had 3 gas pumps, one said made in Saskatchewan and Alberta, one said made in Nigeria, one said made in Saudi Arabia, I know that red-blooded Americans would choose their Canadian ethical oil 10 times out of 10, don't you?
Well, there is an issue there. Certainly there's a carbon footprint that the environmental groups like to talk about. There are other footprints around energy development related to human rights records, and I also indicated that with respect to that exchange with Mr. Sheen. I asked Tammy if any of the reporters there had asked him how he felt about getting oil from a country that didn't fully respect or protect the rights of women. And you know, I've had a bit of pushback on Twitter because people are obviously referencing other countries that Canada does business with who have similar human rights records perhaps, but that's not the point. The point is, if you're going to say no to Canadian oil, on a de facto basis, you're saying yes to oil from another place. And so you have to look at the implications of that in these other areas in terms of ethics, as you put it, Ezra, or human rights. That is a fair comparison. That is a reasonable case for Canadians to make. Yeah. I'm not sure we've made it aggressively. Some have spoken loudly about it, but it's part of the reason why we're here. We also have an environmental record, frankly, to present here. It's imperfect, but it's as good as you'll find in this country, as good as you'll find in our competitor countries, and we need to make that case as well so this thing can be approved.
Outstanding. Premier Brad Wall, you are the greatest advocate of this pipeline in the country. You keep up the fight down there. Thanks, my friend.
Ezra, thanks for your time.
Bye-bye. Hey.